Malaysia's first electric vehicle of its own, and it's arguably the best value EV in the country. Now, the PROTON eMAS 7 is a long time coming, with the world's longest teaser campaign and so many preview drives that we've lost count. But finally, this car is available in production, guys. The eMAS 7 is available in Malaysia as either a Prime or a Premium, with a primary differentiator being the battery. With the Prime, you get a smaller capacity LFP Aegis battery, which means that you get about 350 kilometers of range. The one that we have here, however, is the Premium, which gets a larger battery measuring in about 60 kilowatt hours, which gives this car a usable WLTP range of 410 kilometers. In terms of charging, this car accepts a pretty decent amount of AC power, at least decent given the fact that this car has a relatively small battery pack. But in terms of DC charging, it will accept up to 100 kilowatts, which means 10 to 80% takes a little bit over half an hour. But because it's an LFP powered car, the very first vehicle to run the new LFP Aegis blade batteries from Geely, it does mean that you can charge it to 100% every single time you plug it in. Now, because the PROTON eMAS 7 has been teased for so long, a lot of you are already familiar with what this car looks like, but it's still worth covering nonetheless. So at the front, you have almost no air openings whatsoever in order to give this car one of the lowest drag coefficients ever produced for a PROTON model. However, the lights are very emotive to me because they have a unique daytime running light signature, which makes this car look very distinctive, and they are full LED units, replete with automatic high beam. You even get a scrolling indicator up front, which I think looks quite smart on this car. Now, as we move further down, there are some air breathers here and down there. The ones down there are meant to cool the battery and the radiators, whereas the ones down here are in order to improve the aerodynamic drag by pushing the air over the front wheels in order to create a slightly more slippery profile. Now, I will point out that a lot of you have lamented the fact that the PROTON eMAS 7 does not come with the illuminated grille or the daytime running lights here in the corner. However, I will point out the fact that only the Galaxy E5 in China gets those options. Not a single export market in the world gets the illuminated grille or the daytime running lights on the bumpers, which means that we haven't been left out, it's just that nobody gets it. It is worth pointing out, however, that we do at least get the new eMAS badge up front, which if you look very closely is different from the roundel that you get on a PROTON. As we move further down the side, you can tell that the overall design of this car has been minimized as much as possible to make this car look a little bit cleaner, a little bit more simple, and more importantly, a little bit more aerodynamic. That is very evident from the wheels. Now, on the Premium model like this, you get 19-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Goodyear Efficient Grip Performance tires, whereas on the Prime models, you get 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Atlas tires. That should be another reason to justify getting the extended range model. On top of that, as we move further down, you also get these flush door handles which sit flush to the bodywork when the car is locked. You get a little bit of chrome around the window surrounds as well as on these functional roof rails, which are silver, although I don't advise actually putting anything up there as it will impact the range. But it is unfortunate, however, that the PROTON eMAS 7 doesn't get the nice frameless wing mirrors that we first saw from the Volvo EX30. That would have been a nice way to sort of set off this bit here. Now, I will point out the fact that even though there is no touch-sensitive activator button here to unlock and lock the car, this car does come with a walk-away lock function, which means that when you walk towards the car, it will unlock automatically. When you walk away, the car will lock, which means that you don't really need to fiddle with the key that much at all. And it is also worth pointing out the fact that on this car, you will notice that the glass house is quite tall, which means that there is always a great view out of the car, but that also means that if it's not tinted like this, it's a particularly good view in. At the back of the eMAS 7, you get this incredibly intricate looking light design. They are full LED units replete with the fog lights, indicators, and reverse lights all up here. And of course, you have the full LED light bar, which is bisected by this sort of little dash design in the middle, which I think does make this car look very distinctive, especially at night. As we move further down, you get a sort of diffuser light element. Obviously, there are no exhaust pipes because this car is fully electric. And of course, you get the PROTON and eMAS scripting here, which even comes with that beveled edge that we first saw from the PROTON X90. Now, because this is an EV, and more importantly, a front-wheel drive EV, that means that there is a lot of space behind the tailgate. So while there is no tonneau cover, which to me is a pretty big issue, as that does mean that you can't hide anything that you might have stored back here, the space is pretty good. This is actually more space in the back than what you get from a Proton X70. And if this is not enough, there is actually a usable amount of space underneath the boot floor. Not only can the boot floor be lowered in order to improve the amount of vertical space available, but there's also something called a well, at least ProNet refers to it as a well, which is large enough to keep not only your charging cables, but also all of your emergency tools and so on in that space without impeding on overall cargo space. This to me makes the eMAS 7 an incredibly practical vehicle overall. And of course, if you need even more space, the rear seats can be folded completely flat in a 60-40 split, making this a pretty good family car. Now inside the eMAS 7, this is again a very familiar interior, although because I have spent a lot of time in this, maybe that's why it's familiar to me. Now, the design of the eMAS 7's cabin is something that is a bit of a hit and miss. It's very much in line with what you expect from modern cars today, where there's many screens that control many functions, but Proton has been smart enough to actually include some physical buttons on this car in order to make it more appealing to a broader audience and also make it easier to navigate if this is your first EV. So for example, there are a set of shortcut buttons just up ahead or just below the center air conditioning vents in order to control major functions for the air conditioning. And you also have this rotary knob, which not only controls the volume for your media, but it can also be set to control lots of secondary functions, such as your air conditioning temperature, your air volume, etc. And that can be personalized just by pressing and holding down this rotary knob. The same goes for the steering wheel, because although it is no longer round, instead this kind of actually reminds me a little bit of a TIE fighter from Star Wars, there are physical buttons on either side that allow you to control various functionalities of the car. The right side controls the screen as well as your media functions, the left side controls your ADAS functionality. You still have a stalk here for your indicators and wipers, thank God, and on the right is your gear selector knob, which again allows you to choose your direction of travel. That's all very simple. The same goes in terms of the displays themselves. So although you have this very large touchscreen up ahead here, which uses a unique interface that was co-developed with Acotech and also integrates a live charging map, the functionality of which I'll get on a little bit later. But it's also worth pointing out that this is the highest resolution screen currently available in any passenger car, not just within the segment, but within the automotive industry. And as a result, the graphics on this are absolutely excellent. The colors are really vibrant. And on top of that, because you have various apps in here, eventually you should be able to, for example, have YouTube on this, which is fun to have should you be stuck at a charger for a little while. The screen that actually sits and does duty as your info cluster or your driver's cluster is also of a similarly high quality with a similar refresh rate, and all the graphics again are displayed in a really easy to read manner, which means that you're never sort of hunting to find the information that you're looking for. Everything is available very nicely on this screen. It is worth pointing out, however, that this instrument cluster display is actually larger than what you get on a Smart, be it the #1 or the #3. So that's certainly nice to see. And if that's not enough, there is also a full color heads-up display on this premium model, which not only shows you your speed, your indicator, but also your ADAS functionalities, which means that all the relevant information that you need at any given time is always directly in your line of sight. This is all excellent because it means that, again, when you get in the car, it's very easy for you to just get in and drive. It doesn't come with a ridiculously steep learning curve in order to understand how to use all the different functions. Now, beyond the screens, there's also the sound system, which is of particular note in this car. This vehicle uses something called a Fly Me Sound audio system, which includes something like 16 speakers dotted about the car, including a couple of speakers here on the headrest. Now, the headrest speakers are not actually for audio, but they're instead used to give you navigational instructions and warnings, so that allows the driver to be given all that information, again, closest to the ears should there be an emergency warning or an emergency notification. So that's quite good. The Fly Me sound system itself is also not that bad either. It's quite punchy. The higher notes are nice and crisp, although it lacks the sort of warmth that you'd expect from a properly high-end sound system. And I do think that the audio systems that you get in high-end BYDs, for example, do a little bit better than this. But overall, it is still better than you'd expect for the price. Certainly better than a BYD Dolphin, and certainly better than what you get from a Proton X70. Now, moving beyond that towards the practical aspects of this car, you get a couple of cup holders here which hide behind this coverable section. You also get a little card holder, which is nice for you to hold on to, for example, touch and go cards or access cards. You get a wireless charger up here and a phone holder on the other side. These are rubberized in order to hold onto your devices a little bit better. You've got a decently sized center console bin here, which, although it is not air conditioned, because the air conditioning for the rear is actually piped through this panel, this box remains quite cool, which means that if you put, for example, sandwiches or something in here, it should survive a longer trip. Beyond that, you have more space underneath the center console. We have a USB-A and USB-C port, as well as your 12-volt socket outlet here. You've got really large door bins, big enough for a 1.5 litre size bottle and then some. And you've also got a decently sized glove box up here underneath the dash. It is worth pointing out that this, however, is not lined in rubber or felt, which means that anything that you put in here may rattle about, which is something that you'll notice because this is an electric vehicle. In terms of material quality, these seats are very nice. These are actually a faux leather affair, but they feel very, very soft. And they even come with perforations for the ventilated front seats that you get on the premium model, as well as these little sort of silver buttons on the corners replete with the eMAS badge, which I think is a nice little touch. On top of that, the materials that you can touch and feel, like the dash front and this panel here, this panel here, and this panel here, are all nice and soft. There are only hard plastics further down where durability has been prioritized over sort of upmarket feel. And so overall, I think this car is built to a relatively good degree. The last point I'd like to point out on this car is the fact that for the premium, you get a standard fit panoramic sunroof, as well as an ambient lighting system. And the ambient lighting system in this car is significantly better than what you get in BYD, which helps to make this interior, again, feel a little bit more upmarket, a little bit more luxurious. And again, for a car that currently starts from a little bit under 105,000 ringgit. Not bad. Now, although the eMAS 7 is a C-segment SUV, because this is an EV built off of an EV platform, there is a lot of space in here. In fact, Proton claims that this car offers D-segment levels of space, and from what I can see, they're clearly not lying. With the front seat sat in my driving position, about 170 centimeters, you can see I have a good amount of knee room and a pretty decent amount of headroom despite the standard fit panoramic sunroof as well as the electric roller blind, which means that life back here is pretty positive. On top of that, these seats have not been artificially shortened, which means I have a very good amount of under-thigh support, and because the seats, or rather the floor, is nice and flat, I can actually fit my feet in underneath the seat in front of me if I need to stretch out. The rear seats are also nice and squidgy, which means that when you sit, you kind of sink into them and it feels quite comfortable. And in terms of lateral support, surprisingly, there is a little bit, which means that if you are sat here to cover a longer distance, you should feel nice and corseted and very secure in your seat. Now, in terms of practical aspects back here, you get a couple of crotch coolers in the middle, a USB-C and USB-A port, you get pockets behind the rear seats, and decently sized door bins here. All well and good and all expected from a family car. However, the eMAS 7 boasts a few other practical considerations should you need it. So for example, this useless little cubby hole here is actually a pull. So if you were to pull that handle, you actually find a little drawer. And because this drawer sits underneath where the air conditioning vents cool the rear end, this drawer remains quite cool itself, which means that if you were to put sandwiches or other items in there, they should remain cool throughout. And because the eMAS 7 was designed as a family car, there's also a little drawer here in order to hide even more things. So for example, if you have a young family, you could put extra shoes for your children or various other things in this little drawer and then hide it out of view, all very practical. The seats themselves are nice and soft and they do provide a good amount of lateral support, as I mentioned earlier. But of course, because these seats are a faux leather material, it does mean that they should be quite easy to wipe down. Again, good for family use. You have ISOFIX mounts here for a bulky rear-facing child seat because there should be enough clearance without pushing the seat ahead of you, although the rear doors don't open as wide as you might necessarily want. And if you're sat back here as an adult, you will also appreciate the fact that you have this deployable center armrest with a couple of cup holders, which means that sat back here, you could be comfortable over a longer distance. And of course, because this is the official vehicle for the ASEAN meetings taking place throughout the duration of 2025, as a fleet car, this car does pretty well as well. In addition to the legroom and the air conditioning that I mentioned earlier, the life back here is very comfortable, it's very serene, and it does do a pretty good job as a fleet car, should you be looking to replace your company cars, any one of you. Now, if you're not a fleet buyer and you actually have to drive this thing, the experience from the front seat is also equally positive. Now, the Proton eMAS 7 is a C-segment SUV, and actually at this price point, it will compete directly with the Proton X70, which essentially means that you have a choice between either a fully combustion turbocharged C-segment family SUV or an all-electric one, which is certainly very exciting for consumers today. In terms of the driving experience of the eMAS 7, it's quite clear that the suspension has been tuned for comfort. Now, Proton actually has some 200 engineers stationed out in Hangzhou Bay working together with Geely in order to develop global models like the eMAS 7, which is exported to other markets as the Galaxy EX5. Now, as a result, it meant that Proton engineers had a lot of input, especially when it came to ride and handling, simply because compared to the domestic market model, that was way too soft and it didn't provide nearly as composed dynamics as we would expect from cars in our market. Having driven the left-hand drive Galaxy E5 when that was available in Malaysia, I can attest that the eMAS 7 does have a slightly firmer secondary ride in order to provide a slightly more confident driving experience, which is more in line with Malaysian driving styles. However, that's not to say that this car is uncomfortable, and more importantly, it is not to suggest in any way that this car is dynamically capable, because that is certainly not the purpose. You see, Malaysians actually have a little bit of a reputation for driving very fast. We are among the fastest drivers in ASEAN for that matter. And as a result, high-speed stability and very good body control are things that we look for when we buy new cars. And so the standard fit suspension tune for the Galaxy E5 was far too soft for our market, and that was something that the Proton engineers pointed out when they test drove the cars in Hangzhou Bay. As a result, the vehicle that we get again has that revised suspension, which allows it to provide a slightly more confident driving experience, and that is evident from the moment you get in the car. When you hit lumps and bumps, the primary ride in this car is sufficiently soft, which means it does isolate you from the world around you and provides a very premium, very relaxed sort of driving style. However, when speeds pick up, you will notice that because this car has a slightly firmer secondary ride, it does mean that the body control in this car is markedly improved over the left-hand drive model that this car is based on. That means that driving at motorway speeds and maintaining motorway speeds through, for example, motorway exits, etc., feels like a more confident affair. However, as I mentioned, that is not to suggest that this car is in any way dynamically inclined, because that is certainly not the point of the eMAS 7. Because if you were to drive this car intently over slightly more challenging roads like twisty bits and stuff like that, you will realize that this car doesn't quite have the very positive sort of driver input that you would need to make this car feel like a slightly more exciting affair. On top of that, if you carry too much speed or if you turn into a corner that is a little bit too tight, that's when the body roll in this car makes itself very apparent. Whether you like it or not, the eMAS 7 is a relatively heavy car. Even if all the weight is positioned down low, that doesn't negate the fact that this is still a heavy vehicle. And that weight becomes evident when you try and chuck it around. This car is perhaps the furthest from Proton ride and handling that we've seen from a new generation Proton. In fact, I'd wager that this is actually less enthusiastic to drive than the original CBU Proton X70. However, for an EV, I think the eMAS 7 does exactly what it's supposed to, which is provide a very cosseting, very isolating ride that is more in line with the expectations of customers who would buy vehicles like this. And when you take that into account, I think the Proton eMAS 7 does a very, very good job. For starters, the refinement in this car is absolutely excellent. Even though this car doesn't come with acoustic glass for the side windows, the windscreen does a very good job at sort of removing the majority of noise from the world around you. And so when you're doing urban speeds or even up to 110, 120 kilometers an hour, there is very little in terms of wind noise and noise intrusion into the cabin from the windows themselves. And at higher speeds, wind noise is also minimized by this car's aerodynamics. In addition to having a very slippery coefficient of drag, as I mentioned earlier, this car remains a relatively muted affair even at speeds of up to 130, 140 kilometers an hour based on our testing at the Proton test track. In terms of road roar, however, it does make itself apparent at higher speeds, and that has, I'm sure, a lot to do with the fact that the tires on this car are geared towards efficiency and not necessarily in terms of sound dampening. So a quick upgrade to slightly higher quality rubbers, like for example Continental Ultra Contact 6 tires, might do a better job in terms of noise suppression. But given the fact that this is a 400-ish kilometer range EV, this will primarily be doing duties in town. And so in order to sort of do the usual urban nonsense, like send the kids to school, drive to work, and that sort of thing, I think the eMAS 7 is actually a really comfortable companion. The throttle input in this car is very reactive and it's quite snappy, which means that it's very easy for you to get used to this car. It doesn't throw your head back the way you would in certain other EVs. Instead, it's nice and progressive, although, like I said, it still remains relatively responsive, and so the car always does exactly as you expect it to do. And although the eMAS 7 is obviously heavier than an X70, it's not as heavy as other EVs thanks to that very intelligently designed platform. And as a result, that does also mean that when you're driving about in town, your energy efficiency remains pretty good. In fact, through the period that I've tested this car, I've seen combined or average figures as low as 13.7 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. In fact, you should be able to very easily achieve about 14.5 to 15 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which means that the 60 kilowatt hour battery should be enough to provide a fully charged range of about 400 kilometers, which is again bang on with expectations of buyers within this segment. And on top of that, when you are driving in town, you'll also appreciate the fact that eMAS 7 comes with a comprehensive comprehensive suite of active safety features. PROTON eMAS claims that the eMAS 7 is a level 2.5 semi-autonomy capable vehicle, which means that includes things like lane centering, lane keep assist, intelligent cruise control as they refer to it as well as AEB rear cross traffic alert, and a fantastic 360-degree camera. All of these things help to make the eMAS 7 the sort of car that works very, very well in town. And in fact, as I'm sat here in traffic, using the adaptive cruise control is a relatively easy affair. It maintains a very reasonable distance between you and the car in front. It reacts very quickly to traffic changes, and overall it just makes this a very pleasant place to be. Now, there is one fly in the ointment for this car, and that has to do with the range. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the WLTP rated range for the premium is 410 kilometers. This is a little bit less than what you get from a BYD Atto 3, although that car does have a slightly bigger battery. Now, 410 is actually more than enough for most people to use. In fact, the daily grind for most Malaysians is about 30 kilometers to and fro, and so 400 kilometers means that you'll be going well over a week before you actually need to charge. However, I do understand that with the EV infrastructure in Malaysia still sort of in a developing stage where there aren't really that many DC and AC chargers about, you might be slightly concerned with range. I would have liked to see the eMAS 7 offer a WLTP range of about 450 kilometers, but there we are. Now, to negate that problem, I will give you the fact that the eMAS 7 comes with that live charging map, which means that if you want to take this car out on a longer trip, or if you're just concerned about range, all you have to do is enter the destination into the central head unit, and it will calculate how much power you will use between where you are and your destination and whether or not you'll need a charger. And if you do need a charger, it will be able to not only locate chargers along your route, but it will also be able to live update based on the availability of those chargers, meaning that you won't be wasting your time at a charger that's actually full. Instead, you'll be able to go somewhere where a charger is readily available, minimizing the amount of time you need to stop. That said, however, at the time of filming, the PROTON eMAS does not offer the unified payment gateway and charging management system the way Smart does. Now, the Smart app allows you to trigger charging and pay for charging through the app itself. The eMAS 7 doesn't offer that yet. We haven't been able to get a conclusive answer from ProNet as to whether or not this feature will be offered in the future, but that is a feature that would have been really nice to have on this car, simply because it simplifies charging to a degree that no other vehicle currently offers. But even with that mention, and even taking that into account, the eMAS 7 still provides a really, really good value proposition. At under 120,000 ringgit at present, or even a little over 125,000 ringgit once the car is available at its full retail price, the eMAS 7 is actually priced alongside vehicles like the BYD Atto 3 and even some versions of the Aura Good Cat, despite this car being from a larger segment offering more range and a larger, more capacious interior. On top of that, the eMAS offers a much better warranty compared to those vehicles, which means that driving this and owning this is a truly painless experience. The eMAS 7 is a C-segment electric SUV that I would very easily recommend, not only because it provides excellent value, but because as a car, it's just incredibly practical. You get a lot of space, you get a decent amount of comfort, you get the sort of features that you'd expect from a modern car, and so all of that for under 130 grand just seems like a really good deal. However, if you're not quite ready to make the transition into electric mobility, which I completely understand, or if you live in a high-rise condo like I do and so you have no access to charging, or it's just not something you can integrate into your life, there are other options currently available. For a little bit more than an eMAS 7, you can get into the GWM Haval H6 HEV, which with its hybrid system allows you to travel up to 1,000 kilometers on a single tank, or in fact even further still, if I recall correctly. This means that being petrol-powered, you never have to concern yourself with looking for a charger. However, as it stands today, the PROTON eMAS 7 offers the best value proposition out there. Under 120 grand with the early bird discount as it stands at the moment, this car offers the most bang for buck, the best performance, and the best amount of practicality for the money. The only other vehicle that I can think of that provides a slightly better value proposition is the BYD M6, although that is a compact MPV, and so the overall buying proposition is a little bit different compared to that of the eMAS 7. So if you want an SUV, an electric SUV, this is the car for you. And if you want an electric MPV, then consider checking out our review of the BYD M6 to learn a little bit more about that car. But in any case, that concludes our review of the PROTON eMAS 7. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe and jangan bodoh.